afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending where you're coming in from. My name is Melissa Goldberger. I'm the CMO here at Ox Security, and I'm really excited today to introduce a new series that we're doing called Espressos and Endurance. Today, we have an amazing guest speaker, James Berthoty, even though, of course, I messed that up somehow, from PagerDuty today to talk to us about really just like a nice informal chat of really the realities of ASPM. Before I dive into anything, you're going to find today's session no slides. It's just going to be me and James talking. And we really want the audience to get engaged, like ask questions. Nothing's, our goal here is to bring the community together and to do it in a fun, light way. So for that, but to get things moving, James, do you want to give a little bit before background about yourself? And then, of course, I'm going to have a very pressing question for you to kick things off. So,
Yep. No, thank you. I appreciate being here. I love talking about ASPM because I disagree with Gartner and the prevailing definition. And so it gives me like an amazing starting place to just drop hot takes all day. And my background is more DevOps and systems into security. And I think that informs a lot of my perspectives, as well as primarily startups to SMB, some light enterprise stuff in my work history. But I just don't come at this problem from the traditional, like, I am an AppSec engineer at Microsoft kind of lens. I'm very much focused on trying to get results done with small teams and in the midst of the DevOps chaos that it always ends up being. How do you end up actually making progress and really turning all of these buzzwords, acronyms, features into actual more security is sort of the missing piece of most of the stuff. So that's my background.
So more secure, so more buzzwords doesn't equal better security, I guess.
That's
Then
it's a more fun, at least.
it's a I probably one day want to analyze which letter is not represented in an acronym. I bet you that could be a really fun game of just, is a letter missing in any of the acronyms that we use? But I think that's every industry, right?
Well,
Marketing,
that's
we like lots of acronyms.
while we're talking about this, my favorite one of these is X, because you've got the X bomb, you've got the XDR, and it just sort of goes back to like the 90s extreme days when everything got cooler when you put an X in front of it. So
I love a good X. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie. I mean, we could do, or 2.0. That's always my
that's right.
favorite.
Yeah, yeah,
Next gen, as we're at it. But before we even dive into the real questions, I noticed there's no coffee there. You're not drinking any
that's right.
espresso. What's your drink of choice?
I forgot that I turned on my tea brewer because I'm a bit of a tea person as of late.
Is it
And I bought this like a banana nut muffin tea. That's been
so,
fun.
so you're
So
like a cool brewer that's like break. I like it, but getting all fancy. I've never seen a banana nut tea though, so
yeah, it's
kind of
fun.
excited. See, I'm drinking mine is, I like my busted coffee in my Dollar Tree cup
Mm,
with
yep.
ice. I make iced coffee, and this week it's actually from Costco. So let's dive into some more important things. Besides, unless if anybody on the in the audience wants to share what they're drinking too, please share, put it in the chat. We want to see lots of chat, lots of things. But let's talk. So we talked a lot about acronyms and ASPM. So you started this journey of like, listen, this is all wrong. How do you define ASPM? What is ASPM for you?
Yeah, my ASPM I learned after the fact because my first exposure to ASPM was at one of the OWASP conferences, and just seeing all of a sudden all of these vendors that I knew as SCA vendors or SaaS scanners, all of a sudden they were marketing as ASPM. And so that was the how I was keyed off to it. And then it was actually talking to some of the older AppSec players like Armor Code or Phoenix Security are the two that come to mind that have been very focused on this problem of like ASOC, which was the original acronym from Gartner that I didn't know existed because it's such a specifically enterprise problem of like, we have too many application security tools. How do we orchestrate them together into a dashboard? And honestly, like just in my career path, it makes sense that I never came across that because I was never at an enterprise where we had this problem of like, oh, half of our team in this business unit is using this SCA tool, and other people are using this one and that one. Um, Realistically, the goal that I've always had is like, what can I do to actually make my application more secure with a single tool? And so as that enterprise market is making its way downstream, I think is a lot of what's happening, but also enterprises are looking for, it just didn't exist before, this idea that the technical challenge was too complex to have an all-in-one configuration scanning solution. So there were a lot of point vendors that rose up. Sneak very much being the first in my mind to really branch into multiple tools at once. And that really started the ball rolling, in my opinion, on like the all-in-one scanner type solution. And so ASPM, in my mind, is a continuation of that category of not just like how do I orchestrate tools together into a dashboard, because to me that's just vulnerability management. I don't need like 5 different acronyms to just be vulnerability management. What makes ASPM stand out is it's directly allegorical to CSPM, where the best CSPM players were not like, imagine if Wiz, Lacework, whoever just said, we orchestrate all of these open source scanners into a dashboard for people. Like that wouldn't be a compelling enough case. It's that they're adding their own value along the way to make those results meaningful with their own data that they're injecting into those things. And so that's how I view it. I view it as much more of an ASPM tool is a tool where I can just say, I bought this one tool, therefore my application is more secure as a result, as opposed to the point solution. Like I want the best SCA scanner, the best SaaS scanner, the best IAC scanner, the best container vulnerability scanner. It's an attempt to put all of those things into one place.
I exactly, right. And it correlates. So what do you see? So what do you think, and you've kind of hit on this a little bit of really what's working right now within the ASPM market, what's not? And then I actually am going to add a third question, which we didn't talk about, is are there more SPMs that you see coming out in relation to apps, right? Like whether it's supply chain security or something like that, but what's working and what's not?
Yeah, everyone has the same problem, which is there's too many meaningless vulnerabilities, and that's the there's a million different approaches to that problem, which is why there's so many solutions out in the market. And so even it would be hard for me to decide if I was looking for, even I just did a post on LinkedIn this morning about like different SCA tools and what they focus the most on. And I think it's really difficult to say, should I buy the best internet reachability tool or the best function reachability tool or the best runtime reachability tool? It's hard to tell what's going to be the thing that takes out the most noise by itself. And so really, I think what we're seeing in the market in terms of what's working is on the prioritization side, people incorporating multiple of those ideas into a single platform. And so Ox is just a good example here as far as like, I remember meeting Neatset and just trying to grill him on like, whenever I meet with a company, I'm trying to grill them on like, what's the thing you don't do? And the answer is for Ox was like, every piece of this is technically in there. Is it the best at this or that particular one? But it does do function level reachability. It does do code fixes. It does do showing the runtime context, the code to cloud context. And those are some of the all of that data together helps create the actual prioritization. But more importantly, your actual time as a developer is not spent prioritizing alerts. It's trying to fix the alert. And that's where you need the most amount of context to be in the tool as possible. And I think the people who are focusing on that problem, whether they're marketing as vulneremediation, ASPM, code fixers, like whatever tool is actually providing information to help developers fix problems, is the one that's being the most successful. Whereas I think everything else that's chasing this sort of like prioritization game sort of gets lost in the haziness of like, is this prioritization filter better than this one? Like it's a tough sell to make.
it really is. It's funny because I came from the whole, like a completely other side, right? And come from apps. I came from BAS, and we did the same thing. We touted prioritization, but it's the why, right? Like I joke, right? I want to do a campaign, no bull, just context, right? Because it is about, see, you like it. See, there we go.
Yep.
And it goes in my acronyms. But in all seriousness, it's about that why and understanding. So with this, we talked about, ASPM, it's taking a lot of the noise. Where do you see the current use cases, and where do you see ASPM heading in the next, kind of goes with the part 3 of the question I asked, where do you see it going? And use cases for anybody that's listening and thinking, how do I make the most of an ASPM if they have one, or I'm considering it, why would I use it?
Yeah, I think the ultimate use case for an ASPM is you're tired of not making progress getting things fixed with application security scanners. Because in the early days, I don't think people, especially when we started putting them into pipelines as opposed to this like waterfall, every quarter we're running an application security scan and then remediating the findings. The second we started putting them in pipelines, people had this idea of like stop the bleeding was like the common pitch that people had, or still the way people think about, I need this to run in pipeline to stop the bleeding. But the fact is that most vulnerabilities don't arise from stop the bleeding type approaches. That's true within SAST, they do. But within SCA, container vulnerabilities, like those vulnerabilities come up over time. Like no developer is intentionally finding a 10-year-old version of a library and thinking like, oh, I'm building this net new product. Let me intentionally pick a framework that's no longer supported. Like things get old over time, and then vulnerabilities come up over time as you're scanning in pipeline. And so the reality of the alerts only going up is because sure you're breaking builds in pipelines, but your older packages are getting more and more vulnerabilities discovered on them, and you're never going back to fix them with as tech debt. And so I think that the ASPM goal is to try to create those workflows that get findings to developers in a way that they'll actually fix. And right now, there's a lot of people experimenting with a lot of different ways, whether it's like the no code drag and drop type workflows, whether it's like GitHub based workflows, Slackbot type workflows. There really is a lot of complexity as far as people experimenting with what's going to work to actually get things remediated.
There's a lot of talk around too remediation, and again, I'm going back from my other side of the business, but it applies here. But my previous job, it applies here. Is Do you think there's a lot of automated remediation talked about in the market now? Do
It,
you feel users are starting to get more and more comfortable, or I will tell you, it's hard, right? People are not comfortable automating certain aspects. Do you see a place where they will get comfortable?
uh, Automated remediation in the way that we've been talking about it or with any existing provider is never going to work because it is of zero help. The fact that a lot of these tools that do like auto PR requests as like a feature box, like all they're doing is raising a pull request that changes a version number in a config file from 1 to 2. And if you push that change through, you're going to guaranteed break your entire application. Because in reality, you have to read the change log, figure out what changed between version 1 and 2, and then do the updating. And that's why because I just launched a new category on the site that's code fixers, and they're all people trying to do this automated thing, but there's a reason they're all focusing on SAST is because you can really only have this even idea of an automated PR work with SAST alerts, where in one pull request you're doing like you're fixing a SQL injection because you're parameterizing the queries, like the easiest example. But the second you start talking about major framework updates, the number of like the automation providers you could even theoretically go to shrinks, and the challenge gets a lot harder. And that's why, so I think there's some promising approaches out there, like ChainGuard's approach with container vulnerabilities. Seal Security just came out of Stealth, I think it was like a couple weeks ago, trying to do SCA, where you're like changing your SCA version from the open source version to their version. But even these solutions to automated patching have their own difficulties because you're breaking the dependency chain in a different way that creates its own sort of complexity. So like say I use ChainGuard. Now, first of all, I'm trusting ChainGuard to keep their images just as updated as the open source community, even though they're downstream from it. But I'm also relying on their image being functionally the same as the better supported open source image. So there's just more, you're trading one kind of complexity for another, and I still think there's promise there. Uh, but as far as like we're gonna fix these vulnerabilities with a pull request, I think that's really not what's gonna happen. And there's a couple other providers like Grit and Modern that take a more like holistic approach where it's like we're going to help you migrate from version 1 to version 2, and we're gonna change all your functions. But that has its own, that's it, you're showing the complexity there, but it's less helpful because uh it's more complex, like how you're changing all of the variables. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things, though, too, going back to context, though, right? And some of the automation is at least you can automate the prioritization and where you need to focus, right? And understanding these are the key areas. So I think there's probably a level, right, of balance of where some of that can come into play, right? And how far you want to take it. So I would say maybe some light automation, maybe a little
I think the
milking it.
workflow automation is totally possible. Yeah. Like getting the right alerts to the right people at the right time. And that's where I'm saying there's a
Definitely.
lot of interesting automation stuff people are playing with. Like, I mean, whether it's like Ox's workflow building stuff or other providers like Slack workflows,
Exactly.
different approaches there, like that can all work. I was talking explicitly about the idea of like, I am relying on this system to automatically remediate the thing.
Exactly. No, no, no. And you were, that's where I was going with the question, was keeping it bigger and then just bringing it back down. So I love it. And I think it's just such an interesting conversation to me about this because I feel like it's a challenge, and that could be a whole other discussion for us, right? On automation and all that. But we'll bring it back down to ASPM. And this is, one thing I love is that you have this really great vendor neutral site. And I would love you to kind of just maybe give a quick, overview of what you do there on Latin. I'm doing real well today with names. I'm going to leave that for you. But what should users look for when choosing an ASPM vendor? So if you can share a little bit about your site, because it talks about lots of things, not only ASPM, but then what should listeners look for when they're
Yeah.
looking at an ASPM vendor?
I'll share screen here to try to go through some of it. Um, so uh, the reason I tried to split things up this way is ASPM providers on here. Um, they all hit vaguely similar checkboxes. And just to give an idea of like where this goes weird is like you would assume that everyone on this list, for example, does container vulnerability scanning, but that's like the place where some of this stuff like splits apart and the differences can start to show themselves. Where like Ox is one of the only one, like Ox and Aikido. And I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, which is a little hard, but I think are two of the only ones that include CSPM scanning as part of the ASPM type solution. Um, Whereas some of the other providers on here like don't have specific pieces of it. So the first thing is to really get a clear vision of like which pieces of application security are you really trying to fix and care about. Because it might be that some ASPM provider just doesn't have their own solution for it. The other big picture decision to make is if you want someone like Ox or really more like these remediation platforms, people who these are, I try to separate this with these are people who don't have an agent or not an agent, but don't have any of their own scanning. So like I can't go to Daz and say, scan all of my stuff and integrate with other providers where I don't have your thing deployed. They don't have their own thing that they deploy. They purely orchestrate other people's stuff. And the big, when it comes to this, the visual that I usually show that people are really trying to get towards is like from Ox here, where it shows like this application is deployed using this GitHub action to this registry, which is deployed by this YAML file, and these resources are running in Kubernetes as a result. And this is sort of the view that not too many people that also provide their own scanners do. This is much more of like, even within remediation platforms, there's only like, I think like these four are the only ones that actually show this as well. because this is like probably the hardest technical challenge, but it's also the most essential information to showing the context of the application, where I don't really know. So when I'm using a tool and I get an alert like this Kubernetes container should not explicitly allow elevation of privileges, that's just saying I should add a line to the deployment YAML that changes a setting, basically. I can't know the actual risk of doing that unless I know like where this is running, if it's even actually running at all. What repo am I actually making that change in? And is there anything upstream that's further altering or changing the deployment? And so this is the kind of information that I think developers really care about, is having that fuller view of the application, combined with, if you're going to try to do some of this reachability stuff, there's a lot of different ways that someone can make this graph happen here, right? Where it's trying to show like the priority squishing. And it's important to just be cognizant of how much data is happening to build that prioritization. Yeah. So I'll pause there, but I think really at a high level, understanding the capabilities as far as like building this graph of I don't remember what tab it was under. Let me just go back here where I know it is. Building this graph is like one half of what I look for. And the other half is making sure I really understand like what are the capabilities of like if I use Ox's SaaS tool by itself, because maybe the provider doesn't integrate with another SaaS tool that's important to our business, or maybe I only want to use theirs. Like going through each of these categories and understanding where am I gapped from a visibility perspective, and then where am I gapped from like a functionality perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. No, and thank you for, I love seeing, into the platform. I think it's always great uncovering and showing the context there. Um, so you're pretty vocal, and, you offer great sight into vendors. You kind of already talked about it, but what's something else you really like about Ox? And I know I'm not being vendor neutral, but I got you on the record. So what are just some other things that you think are pretty
Well,
cool
that's,
about what we're doing?
yeah,
I
just
won't
to
hold you to
avoid,
it.
yeah, no, to avoid any vendor salesmanship.
Yes.
The two vendors that I love putting head to head as far as approaches, and I don't know which one I appreciate more, is Ox and Arnica. Um, because and so that's why I'll twist the question and just talk about Arnica as well, where their approach is like, we are gonna give you the best darn SCA, SAST, IAC scanning workflow, and that's it. Like they're gonna give you their vision of the best one, and I appreciate that vision. But Ox has the smooth pitch of if I can integrate with anyone that I want, and if I don't have something, then I can just use Ox's. And at the end of the day, Ox's is probably going to be just as good, if not better, than whatever I'm integrating. And so I think that those are really just a picture of like the two commitments to a holistic like vision. And either you're going to try to provide the best point solutions in each category that exist, and you're going to end up alienating like pieces of the market who either need to integrate something, or like just I need container vulnerability scanning in a solution. And if I want that, then I have to go outside of Arnica, for example, to get that. But with Ox, there's like no compromise as far as there's the workflow building, there's there's all of the kinds of reachability you could possibly want. There's the prioritization aspect, the workflow aspect. Like that's why it's pretty mind blowing how Ox is able to, on a feature sheet, like there's no other even close competition. Like there's people who compete at different pieces of what Ox does, but holistically, I can't. Like I'm sitting here desperately trying to think of someone who's, yeah, just on a feature sheet, both in terms of not just what scanners are provided, but what are features within that scanner. Like there's a lot of people, the other people who do all-in-one scanning don't have function level reachability analysis, attack path visualization, putting the asset inventory together, building the no code workflows. Uh, you have to go to different vendors for each piece of that. And I think that the vision of what Ox has is what makes it stand out in the same way that Wiz stands out in the CSPM space, as far as like uh, we have built a no compromise, flexible platform that's going to do as much as humanly possible with what we have visibility into to surface results for people.
Thanks. You just wrote my website copy. No. Uh, but it's how we do it, right? We do talk to our customers, but in all seriousness too, so we've talked a lot about like, listen, asked you about Ox, but in seriousness, say you're selecting Ox or even another vendor. What are just some of those things, we have a few more minutes that I want to ask. What are some tips to endure an ASPM implementation? What are some things that people, you've selected ASPM, whether it be Ox or someone else, what are some things that you have to think about as you're considering using an ASPM? Or, like I do know Ox is very simple and you can launch, but what are some things that our listeners should keep in mind?
I love this question because I forget about it all the time. As far as like, I am so used to talking to other vendors who are cool startups doing cool stuff here that I forget like the absolute misery and pain that most people are going through who are still on like legacy providers here. Where like I think it was you guys, I don't remember who it was that used the term pipeline lists, which is a little bit of a misnomer because like it is running in a pipeline. But what you mean by that is just you don't have to host and maintain your own Docker image, or it's webhook based scanning. I think that is the single biggest thing to consider is like, if you don't use that, you are going to be dedicating at least one person's job to maintaining the agent that you're running in your pipeline, whether it's getting its own patches, whether it's doing its own vulnerability scanning. I really think webhook based scanning is sort of the line for me as far as like if I would ever even really consider using a tool or not, if it did or didn't provide that. Just because I know firsthand the weight of maintaining your own agent that you're running in pipeline. But beyond that, there's a lot of AppSec tools that have sort of turned into this like Frankenstein monster as they've tried to keep up with stuff, where you have to look at the way that the scan is happening, like and actually like download the CLI and try to just use the CLI and see how painful it is. Where there's a lot of scanners that this stuff just gets so complicated so fast when you dive in the specific feature sets. And the example I'm thinking of is like some people like to approach SCA scanning the manifest files versus scanning the binary because the compiled binary, because there's some pros and cons to each approach. The people who only scan the manifest stuff will tell you that it's faster, it surfaces the results more cleanly, it builds the dependency tree better, there's less maintenance. The people who scan the binary will tell you that like the package people like aren't getting the full context, they're missing data, there's a lot of false negatives. And so really what you want to just think about is like which do I want for different audiences. That's why I think it's important to honestly have both things happening. One is for security people who need the in-depth reporting so that if there's like a vulnerability with a specific package that demands an immediate response, they can query across their entire code base and say, I'm going to find every instance where I know that this package actually exists. But I think the manifest based scanning is good for those quick PRs for developers who are only going to be messing with the manifest stuff. And they're not really going to be looking too much at like, here's where the compiled binary gets loaded onto the image most of the time. Like usually that's more of a DevOps / SRE / whatever your company calls it issue. And so I just think it's important to have like a layer of flexibility there. Where the scanner is not built on some weird technology that requires very specific implementations.
Now, and it's important, right, to consider, and that's one of the things, even as a marketer, I take into account. And when sharing, one thing I love about Ox, it is very easy to implement. So that's my last company. It was a lot harder. I won't say the name because my old CEO will come with me. But in all seriousness, so we talked about you're implementing it, you have it. You raised a good question when we were kind of prepping, and I think, it'll be our second to last. And again, if there are questions from the audience, the first person to ask questions will get an Ox coffee pack or tea. So feel free to type in some questions in the chat. But in the meantime, we're seeing a lot too around compliance right now. I think I was just going through a new report, even on different changes. There's always these suggestions, right? Sometimes no one thinking at how it impacts companies, but how does ASPM address different business sizes and then also their compliance needs?
Yeah. Um, it's such a deep question, honestly, as far as like I've helped a lot of people because a little bit of my background's in like the SOC 2 automation space. And there was, so I know pretty intimately what you need from an AppSec perspective to get through a SOC 2, because in a SOC 2, you're defining your own controls and they just have to align to the trust criteria. And so you can be pretty vague about like, we require reviews is like enough of a control. Um, where you're doing more like branch protection, SDLC type configuration stuff. But then as you scale into some more serious frameworks, that's where you need to show dedicated scanning is happening. And honestly, a lot of the compliance frameworks are pretty lagging on the application security side because they're used to dealing with like host scanning vulnerabilities stuff. Or, I mean, honestly, a lot of the requirements are still around DAST as like the primary report that they're looking for rather than any of these other scanners. But that is very quickly changing. And so I think the main thing is to have something where you can afford to be flexible as the need comes up, because otherwise you're going to end up in this position where you bought the best point solution container vulnerability scanner, and then all of a sudden you need to buy the best SCA scanner, and then you need to buy the best SaaS scanner. If you're sort of letting compliance dictate the program, you're going to just endlessly be trying to buy these point solutions that as the compliance requirements get added in, you're going to be reactively chasing those, as opposed to moving to a newer ASPM that has the more holistic solution where you can just kind of tell the auditor, like, we use Ox for all of our scanning. And then you don't even have to bring up the fact that, like, oh, but in this pipeline, we actually have SemGrep running, or in this pipeline, we actually have this tool running. Because Ox is sort of the orchestration slash fallback layer on like knowing you're going to be able to check the box no matter how it comes up. So really that's how I view it. And on the ASPM front, this is where the different definitions that I have from Gartner can create confusion. Is a lot of those like vuln management ASPMs will only work for enterprises, because the core difference is they don't provide their own scanner. So if you don't have other tools, the tool itself has zero value. Like, it's reliant, there's other dependencies upstream. So that's why I think just scaling with a flexible platform that has its own scanning provided makes a lot more sense from a compliance perspective.
No, I love it. And because there's so much around, I'm a big fan. I find compliance fascinating, and especially not only compliance, now there's so much coming out with regulations and it's just constantly changing. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. Even if someone not in tech, it's just that flexibility to kind of meet what's coming next at you. It's so important. We actually have some questions, so I'm excited. So I get to ship some coffee. I love to go to the UPS store here. So thank you for asking. So we have our first one. Can you share any real world examples or stories using a security tool to save your maybe a different company? We may not want to talk about your current company, and actually get some kudos from like the devs and execs you work for. I love this question. It's a great question. We always want to say, right, security and dev living in harmony.
Well, and that's why yeah, I have a blog post that I did with Sysdig called "Runtime is the Way," and it's because of this question, honestly, where a lot of the hype is around this static scanning. But I think that these static scanners exist for developers fundamentally, because say you get a critical SAST finding in pipeline, that finding is not going to like save your ass beforehand, because, or like after the fact, because you've already deployed this vulnerable thing and you're basically trusting that it is or isn't going to be exploited. And you're only going to know if it was exploited or not based on like either your SIM logic, RASP type rules, like however you're doing log ingestion. And so these kind of configuration scanning tools are really, I just view them in the same practice as like best practice development tools, where you don't really look at them the same way. But I mean, I hate using this example because it's so common, but Log4j was really the time that like SCA scanners got to shine. Because it's one of the few moments where you need to very quickly do a comprehensive scan across your environment for a particular package, see how it's being used in that context, and then prioritize for your developers how you're going to go back and patch it. So that's the obvious one. But I just want to highlight that I think this is where, like, because it's become another like other soapbox. We're in danger because I know we're lower on time and we're opening these soapboxes I have of the it's become very popular to say DAST is dead, but every actual vulnerability I found from a security scanner has been from a DAST scanner, because it's what's actually showing you the runtime. Like, if you don't do cookie validation, that's like a theoretical finding in a lot of tools, and a lot of SaaS providers aren't crossing from service to service to check the validation token. So it's like they see that maybe in this service you've configured some sort of authentication, if they're even checking for it, but your auth provider is probably a different service. And so how are you doing your JOT validation or checking user permissions? Like, those are the type of business logic outcomes that most static testers don't look for, because they're not pretending to be users. And so that's where the DAS stuff tends to come in, is like finding really obvious, like non-public endpoints, things that don't have authentication on them. Like, those are the kinds of save your ass sort of stories that happen, combined with like both runtime side, but specifically like the network runtime side is like, that's your first line of where you're going to actually see like, oh, we have traffic from this pod to a known threat actor IP, or we have some other like traffic burst to something that looks weird, or a web process just opened a shell process. Like, it's those types of runtime alerts that I more associate with like security alerting, because I fundamentally think that runtime exists for security, but ASPM, the end user, is not security. The end user is the developer, and security just sort of exists to help facilitate that with secure design, secure implementation, and like testing. But security is not fundamentally like, I got this alert, so I'm going to go into this repo where I have no context. I haven't ever seen this code before in my life, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to spend a quarter trying to figure out how this service works and deploy a fix, as opposed to just sending the alert to the developer, which is what happens most of the time.
No, I think this is great. I love the soapbox. That's why, come on, this is why we asked you here. We want you on the soapbox. I think that could be maybe fun for your site. You got to get a nice little box on it.
I think people on LinkedIn get plenty of the DAST is cool, runtime stuff is cool. ASPM is like, just get one configuration scanner that you do all that stuff, and then you can focus on the cool runtime stuff that actually like finds attacks and stuff.
Oh, so you're saying ASPM's not cool?
It's really, I mean, parts of it are. That's why I show the map, the application map. I think is really cool, of showing that piece of it. But you know, you're using this version of a library isn't the kind of reason, like, people don't wake up in the morning excited to find like old versions of libraries that they want to patch. Like, yeah.
But you got to do it, right? It's like, sometimes not being, hey, the not cool kid was the one who went on to succeed the most. So it's usually, it's fine. I just kind of love pulling your leg. We got one more question, and then I have a final one to wrap up, but this is also from Vineet, and at the end, he says, P.S. great webinar so far, so thank you. But what aspect of tooling do you think ASPM providers will start to build next and innovate? And where do you see the most innovation? And actually, this is kind of nice because it wraps into my final question too, but this is a great question.
Yep. It's another soapbox thing for me, because I think everyone's working on the wrong stuff. Like, because they talk to too many security people. Like, if you listen to me complain about my day with like vuln management, I'm gonna be telling you that the things that I want are like better prioritization, better false positive detection, better dashboarding to get like executive buy-in. Yeah, I'm gonna be focused on sort of these ancillary things. But there's only so many vulnerabilities that exist, because fixing vulnerabilities is so hard and time consuming. And the focus needs to be on either auto patching stuff, which is what people are all hyped about with Gen AI stuff, which is like 50-50 if it's hype cycle or reality. But the quality of the actual alert and like what it tells the developer about how they fix it, there are certain things that I have told vendors, like if you do this, you will automatically win the market and I will buy your tool instantly. And they still like they don't do it because it's so hard. And these other prioritization pieces are so easy comparatively to make, where it's like, I want a map of the transitive dependency tree that tells me, is this a vendor dependency because I'm using this version of the Datadog agent and I need to bump that version up to a newer version? Or does this dependency, am I like directly using it in some other way? This is mostly on the container side. And people do not want to build that sort of complicated logic that exists within containers of how do you actually get the thing fixed, because it's so contextual to organizations. But that's where the actual opportunity is from a market perspective, is like the way to make the vulnerabilities go down isn't just squishing the priority box down, it's actually making it easier to fix things. And so that's where I think it's the positive side of the Gen AI hype train. But the problem is they're all just doing SAST right now. And so I'm like running out of ways to describe, this company uses LLMs to auto fix your SAST findings. Like that's what they're doing. And like, what's the differentiator? There isn't really a differentiator besides small workflow things. The differentiation on that side is going to be the people like Seal who are bringing it into other areas where it's like, we're using Gen AI to auto patch Terraform, to auto patch containers, to auto patch all of these different things, and then theoretically to there's a theoretical world, and this is like way in the future, where there's some tool you can use that auto remediates all of these different findings. But that's a real pipe dream at the moment. So
Awesome. We have another question from Kim. And it kind of goes on because you talked a little bit, you started to talk about remediation a little. Would it ever be possible to combine auto remediation with blue-green deployments to automatically test if a fix would work?
uh it's theoretically possible, but I've just never, like, most companies don't have good enough blue green deployments to test if their own changes are working, never mind if like some other company's pull request is coming in. But let's say you do have that, the real issue is that nobody really builds except for like the couple of providers who are focused on it, um the major framework type updates. Like, how do you blue green test migrating from Spring 4 to Spring 5? Like that that so fundamentally changes so much of your app, that it would probably be pretty hard to blue green test rolling updated versions of multiple services at a time to make sure they're still working, especially like core services. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that I think that reality, I think there's a reason people haven't generally done it, and it's because it's too complex when it comes to these big framework updates that are usually required to fix stuff. That's why I think that what what Seal and ChainGuard are doing is a little more sensible of an approach for the auto remediation type stuff, because they're backporting the patches for you. And so you don't actually have to blue green test anything. They're theoretically doing that for you, but obviously there's a big asterisk next to the, they're theoretically doing that. So
That's awesome. So I think we've gotten all the questions. It's been such, I love it when the time flies, right? So we try to keep it to 45 minutes. We're here. I love the chat. Any final words before we part ways that you want to share on ASPM? Anything you don't think we covered that, our audience would benefit from?
yeah, I'm curious. I would like to know, and you can send me a message on LinkedIn or something if you are watching this and have an answer. Because I was having this thought the other day that like a lot of cybersecurity vendor, the quote that goes around when it comes to like the risk, the hesitancy to switch vendors is like the you never get fired for choosing IBM. And I think cybersecurity might be different than that, because like the field moves so quickly that you're like actually less secure when you're sticking with some of these older, bigger providers. So I'm just curious how people deal with like risk acceptance with vendor switching. Is my personal thought and curiosity, is because I would love a world where I don't care which modern ASPM you pick. I just like want everyone to be using one because it's so much better than uh, the alternative solutions. But I think in general, people are hesitant to switch vendors because they still have this idea that like switching vendors is risky. But I think once you make the true cut to like, especially like a pipeline list type scanning, it's pretty easy to like swap vendors in and out. Like if you get unhappy with one, like the next year you can swap without too much pain happening. So that's my
Well, if anybody
general
does,
thought.
as we're kind of wrapping up, if anyone does want to share in the chat any thoughts they have around that, that's awesome. If not, you can definitely connect with James on LinkedIn and post it in his page. But I'm curious. I think it's a great topic, actually. I think I may have to talk to you. It's gonna be a great blog topic. May have to use that. And even in marketing, I can relate to that. I'll be honest. I was going through a big transition from work. It sounds trivial because it's not security for a company, but our whole company was built on email marketing, right?
Yep.
And I was like, I'm not getting off of Marketo and Adobe. Like their legacy, they're great. They do everything. And why would I go downstream to like HubSpot, which was known for SMB, but they had an enterprise product. And it was probably the best switch, honestly, ever makes it so many
Yeah.
better features. Again, not security, but always
Every
fun to,
time
yeah.
I have switched products, it has been an improvement. Even if I switched, because there's been I've chosen bad products in my history, but then we just switched off of them the next year, and it's better than like if we had stayed on the people we were on before them. Like,
So the bad product was still not as bad as what you previously
right?
had, just
Yeah,
didn't meet your expectations. But James, I so appreciate you joining us today. We always like love seeing everything that you share on LinkedIn. And again, we will make sure to email your details to our listeners, as well as video of this and a link to your website. For those who are listening, we hope you can join us on March 7th at, let's see, we're 9:30 Eastern time, so it may not work for the West Coast folks, but we do have a different type of webinar, our Ox Unfiltered, which is bridging the gap and uniting development and security. So if you haven't registered for that, we will make sure to include a link there as well. It's going to be a little different. It's more of a panel, so you get lots of folks, but I'm just so excited to have James today. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And I will make sure to I'm going to now try and find you the best tea possible to send you, because I don't think I could get anything better than banana nut, but this is my weekend plan now. So look
I
forward to
appreciate
sending
it.
that. Okay. Thanks, James. Thanks for everything. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day. Take
Yep.
care.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.